Okay. So this lecture is on structuralist social theory, based upon the work of Samuel Bowles and Herbert Gintis as an example. Structuralist theory is situated within the empiricist social science orientation we discussed last time. It's an example that has been important in the field of social foundations of education. And the theory and the approach seeks to discover probabilistic empirical social laws and or social facts that are grounded in the basic structure of economic relations. So it's an attempt to identify a relation between educational outcomes and the structure, the basic structure of a capitalist economy. And it's based upon the theory developed by Karl Marx concerning the basic structure of society. And Marx was one of the original social scientists who developed a structuralist theory of society. And Marx made the distinction, and this was carried on by many others, made the distinction between the base of society, its basic structure, and what he referred to as the superstructure of the society. And the base is grounded in the means of production as well as the relations of production. So the means being the tools, machines, factories, raw materials, etc. Relations of production has to do with the social class relations and different persons' place in the hierarchical economic arrangement, and how those relations are to be understood. And the argument is that base, both the means and the relations of production, shape the superstructure, the ideologies of the society, the consciousness of the people, the law, the media, the politics, the family, culture, etc., including education. And the institution of education or schooling is, from this perspective, in a sense determined by the means and relations of production. And in turn, the superstructure helps maintain the base, the base structure. But the base is, in this theory, in this social theory, the base is the driving force of everything else in society. And as we'll see, that is open to critique and further scrutiny. Capitalism is, from this perspective, the economic system of capitalism forms the basic structure of society, and all other institutions are grounded in and shaped by the dynamics and the relations of production inherent in capitalism. So to understand, and this is a perspective taken by Bowles and Gintis as well. Capitalism is important to understand how it functions. Capitalism as an economic system is about the generation of surplus wealth. And it is important a surplus wealth is necessary, on the one hand, for the formation of various social institutions. The capitalist economy drives the creation of wealth and therefore the creation of revenue that supports other institutions. Capitalism is the use of wealth as a means and not as an end. Its end is to accumulate more wealth. And it's a unique system in that sense. The use of wealth is not the end. It's only a means for accumulating more wealth. And capital is a social process of the transformation of capital as money into capital as commodities, and then back into capital as money. So it's capital as money in use. At the core, one could argue at the core, and this has been argued, at the core of this process is domination. Capitalist domination is not based in force or armed force, but in the withdrawal of support, potentially, in the form of either a refusal to sell commodities or a refusal to buy labor. That should be buy, B-U-Y, in the slide. Capitalism relies on a class of workers who are dependent upon the means and the relations of production of the capitalist class. And capitalism needs this social arrangement in order to function. So under a capitalist economy, there are those who have capital, wealth, and they own the means of production. And the vast majority of people in that economy do not have access to that kind of capital, do not own the means of production. And the only thing that they have to sell in the market, therefore, or to invest in the marketplace is their labor. And they sell their labor to the highest bidder. But the labor that generates the wealth or the value that's generated from their labor is not passed down. The full value of that labor is not returned to the worker. The owner of the means of production siphons off a percentage of the value of that work, and that's the source of profit and the further accumulation of wealth, and then it's reinvested in various companies going forward. Therefore, the relationship of capitalist domination has two poles: the social and economic dependence of a working class and a capitalist class, a wealthy class that drive the accumulation of capital. And if you look, for example, at the distribution of wealth currently in the United States, you will note that 1% of the population owns approximately 50% of the assets. That's a concentration, accumulation of wealth in the hands of a few. The ownership of the means of production constitutes power, the capacity to direct and mobilize society. Wealth is interconnected with power. Wealth is a kind of power. And it requires and generates conditions of inequality. A capitalism runs on a logic of inequality. In order for it to function, it must generate an unequal distribution of wealth in order to accumulate capital. And that's an accumulation of power. One could conclude, therefore, that capital functions as a regime, a power regime. It's based upon the power of owners who own the means of production over the vast majority who must gain employment. So, for example, approximately 90% of the U.S. workforce is employed by others. And this is in tension with democracy as a regime that's based in government by consent. And democracy is driven by a logic of equality as opposed to capitalism being driven by a logic of inequality. So there's an inherent tension, at least, between capitalism and democracy, although they're often equated. They're not the same thing. You can have a capitalist economy under the conditions of authoritarianism, and many capitalists might favor such a political system. We see that emerging, perhaps, in our society. But they're at least in tension. Marx argued that they are in contradiction with each other. And there's a hint of that in Bowles and Gintis. Now that at schooling, educational institutions, its policies, practices, goals, etc., are driven by this tension between democracy and capitalism. Bowles and Gintis identified three basic functions of schooling, and this is within the context of both a capitalist economy and a democratic political system. And those three functions are one is an integrative function. That schooling is one of the goals of schooling is to integrate the next generation into the society, to integrate them into membership. A second function of schooling is egalitarian, to provide equal educational opportunity to all students, to all children, and that has a spirit of egalitarianism. And then a developmental function to develop. Schooling is designed to develop the potential, ideally the potential of each student, and thereby equalizing power. The liberal view is that these three functions, the liberal democratic view is that these three functions support each other, are mutually supportive, that they're not in tension or contradict each other, that we're integrating future generations into a democracy, and therefore there's no tension or conflict or contradiction between the three functions. To integrate is to develop and to equalize the chances of each student. The structuralist theoretical hypothesis, articulated by Bowles and Gintis as an example, is that the three functions are not mutually supportive, but they are in conflict with each other under the structural conditions of capitalism. In particular, the integrative function is inconsistent with the egalitarian and developmental functions of schooling. That if we're integrating the next generation into a capitalist economy, that equal opportunity and development will be undermined for many students. And this functions, the integrated function under the conditions of capitalism, function in terms of what Bolz-Gintis identified as the correspondence principle. The correspondence principle maintains that there exists a determinative correspondence between the social relations of production and the social relations of education. And that correspondence explains and predicts unequal educational attainment. So they're offering an explanation why we have unequal educational attainment, and why is there a persistent inequality in education, and why is there, more specifically, a relationship between family income and educational attainment. And their answer, their theoretical hypothesis backed up by statistical analysis, is that the social relations of education tend to replicate or mirror the hierarchical division of labor in a capitalist society. That the economic structure within which education is situated determines the social relations of education, that is, its goals and functions. If the goal is to integrate into an unequal social structure, then the egalitarian and developmental goals are precluded and undermined any realization of greater equality and distributive justice. So school relations mirror the social relations of the workplace. And we can conclude that the social fact that there exists a social fact of a relationship between family income and educational attainment as a result. And the correspondence principle explains that relationship. Bolz and Gintis argue that the association between schooling and economic wealth cannot be explained by differences in cognitive skills. It's not that those with greater wealth are smarter or have greater cognitive skill. That can't explain the difference. That the intergenerational transmission of economic and social status operates through non-cognitive mechanisms. In particular, the social economic background of the students determines their future income and wealth, determines their educational attainment, and thereby their income and wealth. So inequality, it is hypothesized that inequality is rooted in the structure of production and property relations. And that the integrated function of education under these conditions functions to make legitimate educational and economic inequality. It does this by, quote, providing an open, objective, and ostensibly meritocratic mechanism for assigning individuals to unequal positions, economic positions, constitutes a facade of meritocracy. So the claim is that schools operate and the economic system is based in equal opportunity, and therefore, and based upon that opportunity, we distribute educational attainment and economic wealth on the basis of merit. And the basic assumption assumptions relating to meritocracy. There's a basic assumed equation that through which meritocracy works, that there exists a strong relation between education, cognitive skill, economic productivity, and income. And we begin with innate talent, distributed perhaps under a bell curve, a normal distribution. Other considerations of socioeconomic status, ambition, internal capability, and opportunities are beside the point. Education is designed to develop the cognitive skill of students. The curriculum is differentiated based upon measured cognitive skill, and schooling functions as a sorting device that identifies levels of potential and development of skill. Cognitive skill is thereby developed through education and also processes of socialization, which leads to productivity, and productivity leads to wealth. So wealth is distributed based upon one's achievements, educational achievements, but basically wealth is a function of the development of one's cognitive skill. And that's purportedly under meritocracy distributed. The opportunity to develop whatever innate cognitive skill one has is to be distributed on an equal opportunity basis. Bowles and Gintis suggests that their main argument in their structural theory is that only a minor portion of the substantial statistical association between schooling and economic success can be accounted for by the school's role in producing or screening cognitive skills. And this is illustrated in figure 4.2. There's a direct, this is a statistical model of the relationship between socioeconomic background and adult income or occupational status, mediated through schooling. There's a direct relationship, but it's also mediated through schooling and IQ. As it turns out, there is a direct relation between a person's family background, their social class, and their eventual adult income on the average, statistically. And there's a mediating influence of schooling, but there's a direct relation. So the conclusion is that the basic meritocratic equation is flawed. It doesn't match the statistical data. Of course, Bowles and Gintis data is based upon white male students, and that might skew the data. The schooling might function differently for different students, for girls, for African Americans, for others, for Hispanic students, etc. But we'll come back to come to that. But at least there is significant other evidence that matches Jean Annion's work. She did qualitative observations in 3 different kinds of schools that were based upon socioeconomic status of students, and she found that the relations within school matched their social class background pretty clearly. That in working class schools and lower income schools, neighborhoods and schools, they were the emphasis was on just getting by, or an emphasis on disciplinary action, on obedience and authority, whereas in wealthier schools, in wealthier communities, the social relations of schooling were to encourage students to become leaders, to ask questions, to criticize, to be independent in their thinking, not to obey, to be obedient to authority, for example. And that would be an example of mirroring between the social relations of wealth and production and the social relations of schooling. We'll discuss that further. So there is strong it's a strong hypothesis that the structuralist theory puts forth, that the key to understanding and explaining educational inequality issues from the social fact and the dynamics, the structural dynamics of an economic hierarchy, and that under those conditions, the structure of capitalism necessarily results in an unequal educational system through the correspondence principle. There is, as we proceed, there is an argument that this approach, this economic structural approach, neglects the importance of cultural capital. It emphasizes economic capital, but does not sufficiently account for the existence of cultural capital. That this is a quote from Michael Apple, who we'll turn to next, and to neo-Marxist critical theory as a different orientation that attempts to understand the economic relation in terms of cultural domination and ideological hegemony, and the schools as an apparatus, an ideological apparatus that is designed to maintain the economic social order. That it's not so deterministic, between a direct deterministic relation between the social class hierarchy and the functioning of schooling and education, that is mediated by a set of ideas that are perpetrated by the school, and that the schools are not schools and the larger society are not fully determined economically by the base, that there are other factors involved, and they are of an ideological or of a cultural nature, which we'll turn to as another orientation going forward.